Hello, welcome back to Planet 40k. So in today's video we're going to be talking about the Annihilation Legion, which is the new army of renown from the Necrons. Now if you aren't sure where we've actually got this information from, it's from the latest issue of White Dwarf. It's issue 481, and all the army of renown Annihilation Legion rules are within that magazine. Now we have already done a video going through all the options of this army of renown, so if you haven't already seen that video, there'll be a link in the top right for you now. It's where I reacted for the first time to all the rules and buffs that we're going to be getting. But now that I've had time to actually digest what we've actually received, now because we've already kind of covered it in the previous video, what I'm going to do in this video, I'm going to be talking about some synergy and some interesting combinations that we can use when using this army of renown. So we're not going to go through every single thing like we did in the previous one. There are also going to be some points and notes that we're going to be discussing before we actually get into this video, so let's begin with that. So first of all units have to be within the same dynasty, but destroy cult units lose their dynasty code. Now I just wanted to clarify for you that a dynasty is a keyword and a dynasty code is an ability. They are not the same thing, so when the destroy cults lose their dynasty code, they still keep the dynasty keyword, so therefore they've still got access to the dynasty stratagems, the dynasty relics and the dynasty warlord traits. If, for example, they were from the Mefrit dynasty, they're not going to get their dynasty code, so they're not going to get that plus 3 inches, they're not going to get the extra AP, but they still keep that keyword. Very similar to our Silent King, in fact, because he's got the Zerican dynasty keyword, but he cannot have the dynasty code. So I just wanted to clarify this right from the get-go, because throughout the video, we are going to be mentioning some stratagems, relics, and warlord traits that are going to link to certain dynasties. Also to note, flayed ones and plasmacytes do not lose their dynasty code. So if they were from the Novak dynasty, perhaps they still get that plus 1 inch to the charge. Also note here that flayed one units that have got 10 or more models gain objective secured. Now if you look into the Nihilak dynasty or Eternal Conqueror's dynasty code, all units are going to gain objective secured, but now they've already got objective secured. And it then states in those dynasty codes that units that have already got objective secured are going to count as 2 models for when holding objectives. So that's actually really key here, because if you're contesting an objective of a unit of 10 flayed one models with objective secured, and also your opponent has a unit on that same objective that also has objective secured, they literally cancel each other out, and then it goes down to model count. If you've got 10 models that are within 3 inches of that objective, that's going to count as 20 models in this example, so we're likely going to still be holding that objective. So I just wanted to also share an example of how we can still be using our dynasty codes. Okay, so all units have lost the command protocols, but destroyer cult units have gained the Annihilation Protocols. Now, I'm not a big fan of this one at the moment, to be honest with you, unless they FAQ it, because units now need to be within 6 inches of a Lokhust Lord or a Skorpekh Lord. Hexmark destroyers are not even going to count for this anymore, even though they are a character model. So it's kind of gone back to the old ways of being within 6 inches of a character, which kind of made our protocols kind of stink. Also, we've got no permanent protocol throughout the entire game like we do with our normal command protocols. So for this reason, I'm not going to go through all these protocols until they do FAQ it. I mean, they may not actually FAQ it. It's not that often that they FAQ some rules and abilities that have come from a White Dwarf magazine. So this may not get an FAQ whatsoever. But until that gets sorted out, the Annihilation Protocols for me, they're not going to be that strong. Now don't get me wrong, once we start playtesting this Army of Renown, maybe we've found a configuration where we can actually make good use of these Annihilation Protocols. But until then, I'm going to skip past that. So the destroyer cult units are gaining that Cult of Annihilation ability. So this is going to effectively replace their dynasty code. So it's a plus 1 to hit for units that are below full strength and a plus 1 to wound for units below half strength. So this is actually going to make our Lokhust destroyers very important all of a sudden. Let's say you're charging with a Skorpekh destroyer unit, the likelihood is they're going to be at full strength because you're not going to have targeted them with the Lokhust heavy destroyers, and you're not going to have already fought them with another melee unit, because 9 times out of 10 you either lose your unit or you're literally wiping out their unit, because destroyer units are very strong. So this makes those Lokhust destroyer units extremely important. They've almost got a new role in the game for this Army of Renown. They're there to weaken a unit, and then they're given the bonuses and buffs. So they're almost like our new My Will Be Done models for destroyer cult units. So what we would do if you've got, say, a unit of 5 of these, you want to be split firing these to try and just remove one single model from a unit. That way you've weakened the unit, they're going to be below full strength, therefore anything that charges them or anything else that fires at them is going to get a plus 1 to their hit rolls. Also don't forget we are re-rolling ones as well because we are destroyer units. Now, I do question the +1 to wound ability because the likelihood is if a unit is under half strength, it's going to die anyway. If a Skorpekh Destroyer unit or an Ophidian Destroyer unit makes the charge on a unit that's under half strength, they're going to get wiped out anyway. It's only the big vehicles, monsters and titanic models that we sometimes struggle with, but we can't get those units to be under full strength or under half strength because there's only one model in those kind of units. So therefore, I don't think the +1 to wound is as important, but the +1 to hit, yeah, definitely makes a big difference. So let's get onto some unit synergy, using some of the new bonuses and maybe linking them up to some of the old ones. So the first model I'm going to go through is the Lokhust Lord. And if you're taking the Annihilation Legion Warlord trait, which is Furious Destroyer, all 6s to hit in melee cause 2 additional hits. Now, if you've given the Lokhust Lord the Novak keyword, of course he doesn't get the Novak Dynasty code, but he still retains the keyword for relics and things like that. So you can replace his War Scythe with a Blood Scythe, which is 2 additional attacks in melee. So now all of a sudden your Lokhust Lord has got 6 attacks hitting on 2s. Any 6s to hit cause 2 additional hits on top of that. You're likely going to have more hits than you had attacks in the first place, which makes him very killy. Now another little piece of synergy, if you were to take the Annihilation Legion Relic, which is the Chariot of the Hierarchs, it means your Lokhust Lord can only be wounded on a 4+. So anything strength 6 or above isn't really going to matter, you still need a 4+ to wound him. Also, the pile in and consolidation moves are an additional 3 inches. They already naturally pile in and consolidate 3 inches anyway, so having an additional 3 inches puts that up to 6 inches. Now one of the Annihilation Protocols, which is called Perfect Destruction, I believe it's number 5, one of the directives gives 3 additional inches to the pile in and consolidation moves. Okay, you will have to time this perfectly before the actual game begins because you need to order your Annihilation Protocols pre-game, but if you do get this perfectly right, you could stack this with that relic and have a 9-inch pile in and a 9-inch consolidation move. Pretty bizarre, but it is doable. And the last one I wanted to mention for the Lokhust Lord today is using the Necron Codex Warlord trait Enduring Will for that -1 to all damage taken. That was quite a common one that we used to use. Before we had to actually pay for our Warlord traits, that was used in most games. And then using the Annihilation Legion Relic, Chariot of the Hierarchs, again we've already mentioned that one. Our model can't be wounded on less than a 4+, and the piling consolidation la la la. Then you take the Lokhust Lord upgrade, which is the Phylactery. So Living Metal is a return of D3 lost wounds as opposed to 1. So when you combine all 3 of these together, this makes a very resilient Lokhust Lord. -1 to damage, you bring back D3 lost wounds, can't wound it on less than a 4+. He's already got a 4+ invulnerable save, toughness 5, 6 wounds. He's going to be an absolute nightmare to get rid of. Next we're moving on to the Skorpekh Lord synergy. So the first one of note here, it's not really so much of a synergy, it's more just making use of a Warlord trait. So the Annihilation Legion Warlord trait, Furious Destroyer, 6s to hit in melee, cause 2 additional hits. Now if you are using the Flensing Claw weapon that he has, where you make 2 attacks instead of 1, so his base attacks is 4, so that means he uses 8 attacks for the Flensing Claw. If you've got 6s to hit causing 2 additional hits with 8 attacks, you're going to have a hell of a lot of hits there. Again, you're going to be hitting on 2s, so yeah, you're going to get a lot of attacks. You're very likely to be getting more than what you started with. Another bit of synergy is taking the new Skorpekh Lord's Relic from this Annihilation Legion, which is the Nightcull Scythe. This is where your Hyperphase Harvester is upgraded to the Nightcull Scythe, and it's basically the same statistics except damage spills over to the next model, which is pretty cool on its own. If you're then combining this with the Necron Codex Warlord trait Eternal Madness, where you get to reroll all your wound rolls, that can do a lot of carnage to your opponent's units. Then the last character within this army of renown is the Hexmark Destroyer. Now he's got a new relic from the Annihilation Legion, which is Mask of Obliteration. Instead of using his 6 pistol shots individually, he can combine them all to 1 strength 9 shots, which is D3 plus 3 damage. Now why this is pretty good is because of the Hexmark ability Dimensional Translocation, which is effectively Deep Strike. He can be coming in turn 2 onwards, popping 9 inches away. You may even be able to catch a character that's been positioned badly. If they're not within that Lookout Sir bubble, yeah, you can do an average of 5 damage. Now again, he's hitting on 2s. Strength 9 is likely going to be wounded on 3s, if not 2s there. And yeah, D3 plus 3 damage right off the bat is pretty decent. Now before we get into the stratagems and all those kind of things, I wanted to talk about some Relics of Note. These are from the standard codex, but these are going to synergize with our new Army of Renown. First, of course, the Veil of Darkness relic. We can't go through this video without mentioning the Veil of Darkness. It still works the exact same, but we've got to make reference to it. We're going to be using that for our Skorpekh Destroyers in particular. getting them in 9 inches away from enemy models, and yeah, making that charge, hopefully hitting on 2s, hopefully wounding on 2s, re-rolling all the 1s. Veil of Darkness is pretty key. Now something that does tend to get forgotten about is the Lokhust Lord can take a Resurrection Orb. Now on multi-wound models, resurrecting them isn't as straightforward because you've got to get a 5+ roll on all of their wounds to bring them back, but you can upgrade that to an Orb of Eternity relic and then it'll be a 4+ roll, and if you do lose 2 models, then with the Orb of Eternity, on average you will get 1 of them back, whereas if you're taking the Resurrection Orb without the upgrade, it's 1 model comes back for every 3. So you've got less chance of bringing models back, and some of the unit sizes are quite small, especially smaller games. Maybe you're only taking a unit of 3 anyway, but I just wanted to mention that in the Relics of Note. Now the next one is the Skorpekh Dynasty Relic, which is the Vanquisher's Mask. Now, you don't normally associate the Skorpekh Dynasty with Destroyer Cult units because the Skorpekh Dynasty is more about the rapid fire weapons. But don't forget, we don't get the Dynasty codes with the Destroyer Cult units anymore with this Army of Renown, so that completely goes out the window. However, the relics, the stratagems and the Warlord traits are still usable. But this particular relic makes one enemy unit within 3 inches of the bearer not be eligible to fight until all units in your army have done so. So if you do get caught out on the charge, this will mean they're going to be fighting last. Also very similarly, the Annihilation Dynasty relic has the Infinity Mantle for a +1 to your armor saving throws, so we could have our Lokhust or Skorpekh Lords on a 2+ armor save, and also having a 6+ Feel No Pain save. Now I'm not sure if that's better than the Lokhust Lord's Chariot of the Hierarchs new relic that he's got in this Army of Renown, but you do have the option of having a 2+ with the 6+ Feel No Pain save. Also wanted to mention a couple of weapons within the relic options, the Void Reaper for one of them, being able to ignore Feel No Pain saves and other rules that ignore wounds. So that's going to be pretty good with the Furious Destructor Warlord trait from the Annihilation Legion, because 6 is to hit will score 2 additional hits. And also the Voltite Staff I think is quite interesting because at range, any 6 is to hit will inflict 2 additional hits. That doesn't normally happen in melee, but with this Warlord trait, the Exploding 6s also happen in melee. I thought that was quite an interesting thing to have for our Lokhust Lord there. Now, in terms of Warlord traits of note, of course the Implacable Conqueror is definitely a noteworthy one to mention here, having that reroll to the charge roll. We of course do not have a Chronomancer within these lists, so no Chronometron ability here, but there is a way of having rerolls to our charge rolls with the Implacable Conqueror Warlord trait. Next we've got the Mefrit Dynasty Warlord trait. Again, we can still use their Warlord trait, we've got the keyword, but the Merciless Tyrant is a +1 to the strength and attacks characteristics of the Warlord. Now this one may not be as needed, but if you wanted to have a +1 to your strength and an extra attack, yeah, you got that one just there. The Annihilation Dynasty has got the Precognitive Strike Warlord trait to allow our Warlord to have the Fight First ability, and also the Skorpekh Dynasty Warlord trait just to get the extra CP back. Now before we're going to go on to the conclusion, I wanted to go through 4 of the Annihilation Legion stratagems. The first one is Swift Dismemberment for a command point, so it simply allows a Destroyer Cult unit to advance and charge. I think this one is really strong. You could literally get a first turn charge off. You're going to be moving 8 inches, maybe 10 inches with the Ophidian Destroyers if they start them in the deployment zone. You're then doing an advanced move, which could be anything up to 6 inches, and then your charge move on top of that. I think that one is really strong. The next one of note is that Hyperphase Impalement for a command point. This one's another really strong one. Now this is for your Ophidian Destroyers only, which makes them really usable now, and any rules that ignore wounds cannot be used against them. So that's your Feel No Pain saves, but also more importantly, if you're going up against Abaddon for example, who can only lose 3 wounds in a given phase, you're completely ignoring that rule. The same applies to our Catan Shards. We can only lose 3 wounds in a given phase. If we were going up against this kind of Necron army, they would ignore our Catan Shards ability. So that one can be really useful, and it's kind of one of those got your stratagems where your opponent is not going to see it coming. The third one I wanted to mention is Weaponized Bodies. Now this one is 2 command points, but I think this one is really good. So all models within a selected unit within engagement range, and it has to be every model within engagement range, they're going to add up the amount of wounds they've got. You roll that many dice, and each 5+ roll inflicts a mortal wound to a max of 6. Now this is for Destroyer Cult units only, but if say you've got 6 Skorpekh Destroyers and all 6 of them are within engagement range of a unit, that's going to be 18 dice to play with, which on average is 6 mortal wounds. Now it doesn't even have to be the Skorpekh Destroyers, oddly it can even be your Lokhust Destroyers. Now they're not really any good in melee, but if you've got a unit of 6 of them, and even the Heavy Destroyer too, that could be 7 of them, that's going to be 22 dice in your dice pool, so again on average you should be maxing out with that 6 mortal wounds. You could literally remove a character model, you could finish off a vehicle model, and this kind of unit isn't even a melee unit, so I think that one's really cool. And the final one I wanted to mention here is a Moment of Clarity. Again, 2 command points, just giving a unit objective secured until the next command phase. I think it's another one of those got your moments where you literally get onto an objective, your opponent thinks they've got it, and you just pull out this stratagem, 2 command points. Okay, it is a little bit pricey, but you can literally be stealing points from under your opponent's nose, and in fact gaining some points depending on what kind of secondaries you've got there too. Now in closing, there are some points of note that we've got to discuss, some good and some bad. First of all, I really like the fact that the Lokhust destroyers are now very important. They are pretty much now the new My Will Be Done unit. They're chipping away at units and then moving on to the next one, just to give our other destroyer units those +1 to the hit and wound rolls. Now unfortunately, we've got no access to the invuln saves because there's no Chronomancer. Also, Reanimation Protocols isn't that great on multi-wound models, so bringing them back is going to be quite difficult, and we don't have a Technomancer to do it either, which is one of the ways I generally play. I like to bring models back such as the Lokhust Heavy Destroyers with a Technomancer. This cannot be done with this Army of Renown. Flayed 1 units are now a very good point scoring unit. I mean, that's how I played them anyway, to be honest with you, but some of you guys like to play them in the Novit Dynasty. They were more of a killer unit, but now for 100 points for a deep striking OBSEC unit, I think that's pretty decent. And if you're taking the Annihilation Dynasty as mentioned earlier in the video, they can have double the model count. Now just bear in mind they still do keep their Dynasty code, the Flayed ones, because they are not destroyer units. So if you did select the Novit Dynasty, they still get the +1 to the charge, the extra AP, so just bear that one in mind. Now CP wise, a few people in the comments mentioned that we're going to be short of CP. I didn't agree with that, and I'm going to explain why. So first of all, the Vanguard detachment is completely free if your Warlord is within it, which it should be. Now in bigger games, we're going to need a Spearhead detachment because we need more Lokhust destroyers and more Lokhust heavy destroyers. 2 unit slots is not going to be enough. So we're going to have to spend 3 command points for a Spearhead. It doesn't have to be a Spearhead, in fact, it could be any of the other options, but a Spearhead you're going to get 6 additional heavy support slots. So that still leaves you with 3 command points in the bigger games for your Warlord traits and your relics. So you can buy a Warlord trait, you can buy a relic, and you've still got 1 left over. In the smaller games, you're not going to really need an additional detachment because you've got 2 heavy support slots. That's all you really need in a 1000 point game. You don't really need much more than that. Now unfortunately, there's going to be no Silent King, so there's going to be no Code of Combat secondary objective, so we've kind of restricted ourselves on the secondaries. Also, we've got no option of the Catan shards. Now I personally like the Nightbringer, so we haven't got that natural Primarch killer within our lists. This Army of Renown is very killy. I'm just a little bit worried on how we're going to actually score points because that is the Necron game. We get onto our objectives, we hold our ground, we score our primaries, we score our secondaries. Ancient Machineries is still an option I suppose, but most of our units are going out killing. But things such as Treasures of Aeons, we've got to kind of time our charges to make sure we're getting onto an objective, but we're not going to have objectives secured or the Relentless Expansionist pre-game move. We've kind of lost that. And I think this Annihilation Legion just isn't as good as having that kind of list with a Silent King, objective secured, pre-game movement. I think that is still our best option. So until November, when we get our second Army of Renown coming out, which I believe is to do with the Cryptex and the Canoptic units, that's going to be really interesting. I'm really excited for that one. But yeah, until we see that one, I think our best play is still with the Silent King. So guys, that's the end of the video. If you haven't subscribed already, please do so below. Also check out our membership by clicking the join button down below for more information. So other than that guys, all that's left to say is thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.